Well, hello everyone. I'm Elaine Watson, editor of FoodNavigator-USA, and I'm excited and also mildly terrified to be asked to chair this panel about sensory challenges in meat alternatives, which is an area that all of the major players are investing in now as the competition in this category really heats up. So we've got about 50 minutes to delve into this topic, and so I'm going to spend the first 40 minutes quizzing our expert panel, and then in the final 10 minutes, the far smarter questions from the audience we're going to address. So please, put in your questions to the chat box on the right-hand side. We will definitely get to them. So please, submit as many questions as you can. So just before I introduce my panel, I will let you read the participant guidelines, which I believe, are on screen now. So you've probably seen these a million times already. But basically, it just says be respectful and constructive in your comments. If only that applied to the internet in general. So if you experience technical difficulties, please go to the Expo tab on the bottom left-hand side of your screen and visit the help desk, and they will help you there. So with that, I would like to introduce my panel, and hopefully they can all join me on screen now with their cameras. Greetings, everybody. So thank you again for joining us. So I would like to introduce on the top right first, Dr. Dilek, Uzunalioglu. I know I've pronounced that wrong. I apologize. Head of Food Applications at Motif Foodworks, which is a Boston-based company that's done a ton of work in meat and dairy alternatives with these kind of high-impact, low-inclusion ingredients, which are pretty exciting. Next up on the bottom right, we have James Petrie, who is CEO at Nourish Ingredients in Australia. So it's some truly insane time of the morning for James on a Saturday. But James is producing interesting fats that can work well in meat alternatives from microbes such as yeast. And then on the middle, at the top, we have Dr. Adam Janczuk, who is VP Global R&D at the Nourish division at International Flavours and Fragrances. So that's not connected to James's business. They both just like the word Nourish. So, and last but not least, on the bottom left, we have Dr. Matt McGuffey, who is Product Manager Plant Protein Solutions at Givaudan Taste and Wellness. So thank you all for joining me today. So I'm going to start with a lightning round. So I think it's pretty clear that meat alternatives are getting better and better. But if you look at the consumer research, there's still a perceived taste and texture barrier. So 30 seconds each, from a sensory perspective, where and why do some meat alternatives still fall short? I'm going to start with you, Adam.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be on, and a unique opportunity to talk about it. I mean, I hate to say it, it's taste and texture, right? I mean, for comparing it to what's there already on the market, people are still using the real stuff as a point of reference. It's pretty far from it, and there's an expectation. So taste and texture is probably the #1 challenge beyond other things. But
excellent. Dilek, same question to you.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. And Adam, yeah, you are absolutely right. I mean, when we look at consumers, when we look at the reports, when we do focus groups, what we see, taste is the king. And a lot of consumers telling us that if the taste is better, they will eat plant-based foods. And then texture is the second, I will say, overall. Aftertaste is another challenge coming up a lot. Follow up with the look of the product.
Okay, great. Same question to you, Matt. I think you're on mute.
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks, Elaine, and thanks GFI for having me. Yeah, just to echo that, it is taste, and in order to deconstruct taste, you need to use sensory tools. And at Givaudan, of course, we've invested a lot in sensory resources. And in North America, we've been tracking the burger taste and deconstructing that over the years with our descriptive panel. And there's definitely been a positive migration of the market products towards an 80-20 beef hamburger, for example, and deconstructing those beef taste attributes. You can parse some flavors like boiled beef, for example, where all of the market products really fall short, and that gives us an opportunity to investigate how we can bridge that gap.
Okay, and finally to you, James, at Nourish. What are the biggest challenges from a sensory perspective in some of these meat alternatives?
Look, I'll agree with everything that's been said around taste and texture. I think in order to avoid repeating it, I'll say something different. When you open these foods, like right from the beginning, through the cooking process, through the eating process, through the aftertaste, there's something not quite right. Okay, and that's because not all of the ingredients are animal-like, and we have really finely tuned sensory apparatus up here that tells us when we're eating a real thing or not. So we have to really try and nail the challenge from a whole variety of angles and really make it as animal-like as possible to fool those taste buds and those sensory cells.
Okay, well, that's like a good place to start, really. I mean, maybe starting with you, Adam, at IFF. I mean, can you kind of outline the basic challenges here? If you pick up a raw beef burger, a regular beef burger, or an uncooked pork sausage, doesn't really smell like that much. You start cooking them and they release hundreds of these amazing flavors and aromas, and then you've got the heat and the interactions with the fat and all the rest of it. How do you even begin to replicate that with plant-based products?
No, and I think that's where still the challenge, and Matt had also kicked off of, what is the consumer expecting out of that? At what point are they experiencing it? Are they cooking the raw, or is it being brought to them at a restaurant on a plate? What are you smelling compared to other things? And so, starting to replicate is also understanding what is the consumer looking to have at what point in time? And having that experience from end to end, you can then start to say, how do you address the challenge? Because if you're getting a piece of raw meat, exactly, you don't want it to smell like already a grilled product before you even start cooking it. And so for me, I think it's really understanding how consumers are going to take these products in, and then looking at the mapping of where do you, from a flavor perspective, from an aroma, because again, multisensorial, you're perceiving flavors multisensorial, from the visual, from the olfactory, from the gustatory to somatosensorial, all of that together, and then start mapping out what are they expecting out of these things. Where do you want to block the unusual notes? Because again, plant-based, you can pick it out pretty quick. And where do you want to enhance areas that makes it exciting? So that would be my at least start up before taking up any cue from any other panelists here.
Absolutely. So Matt, at Givaudan, I mean, can you talk a bit about what contributes to flavor in regular meat and what's contributing to flavor in plant-based meats? I mean, I guess it's kind of everything, but is it primarily the protein, the fats, the natural flavors you see in the ingredients list, or just the combination of all of those?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, when you look at 80-20 beef, maybe a little bit of salt, you cook that, it tastes great on its own. And, it's a very complex reaction, creating hundreds and even thousands of chemicals through the Maillard reaction. So we do the best we can, and we're continuously working to understand how it works in the animal protein in order to create vegetarian ways to create those same flavor sensations. And underneath a natural flavor, that there's multiple tools in the flavorist toolbox in order to achieve that. As Adam just mentioned, masking is of course very important, and just bringing that base to neutral, so you've got a nice neutral palate to start with. Then on top of that, you build cooking cues. So one thing about the products in the market and for burgers is you do get very nice seared notes and grilled beef notes that are fairly similar in their tonality to a plant-based or to a real burger. And then layering on top of that, you've got your beef notes. We talk a little bit about mid notes and top notes, and how those evolve throughout the mastication process. And when you deconstruct that, we still find some gaps, as I alluded to earlier, around tallow and boiled beef, and that really gives it that we can detect with a sensory panel, and then that gives us the opportunity or the vision and the focus to be able to work on improving how we can deliver flavors like that. And then the last thing I'll mention quickly is just having a nice seasoning blend. So you want to create a lot of tastes and savory taste sensations, and a nice clean label seasoning blend with garlic powder, onion powder, salt, pepper. Those things all help to contribute to an experience that a consumer is going to think of as a real burger.
So Dilek, I want to bring you in here because we were writing, I can't even remember when it was, last week or the week before, about myoglobin, but this question comes up a lot. I mean, do you need kind of iron containing molecules like heme to deliver an authentic meaty taste in a meat alternative?
Definitely, it is very critical and important. But maybe I'll just take a little bit back, Elaine, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how fascinating a real beef is when it's cooked, right? When you think about it, there's so many physical chemical changes when you are cooking a beef burger. And Matt, as you mentioned, you are talking about that muscle fibers expanding, shrinking. You have water in the system working through the muscle fibers as the cooking process is happening. Then you have some collagen, elastin in the muscle, which is also providing texture. And it happens in a sequence of events, and finally you are forming the flavor and aroma through some reactions, as you said, caramelization, Maillard browning, etc. And also it is worthwhile to mention the fat too, right? At one point in the process you are starting to melt the fat, and then with the muscle fiber you are locking that fat within the system of the muscle fibers. And these are, I mean, it is really important to look at holistically, right? What is happening and the real thing, and how we can mimic it. So if you think about from that perspective, we talked about taste, and myoglobin, which is a heme-binding protein available in muscle protein, is one of the key elements to create that meat-like flavor and aroma. And it is available in muscle protein. And we are using precision fermentation through our partnership with Ginkgo Bioworks to create that cow muscle protein without using any animals. And
so you're genetically engineering a yeast to express this particular protein. Yeah,
without using any animals. Yeah.
And what is the difference? I know people have asked me this question. What's the difference between, say, the soy-like hemoglobin that's in Impossible Foods flagship burger versus the myoglobin that you're looking to commercialize?
Definitely. I believe that, Impossible have done great work to bring the soy hemoglobin to the market, right? It is a great product. It really gives that authentic meaty flavor. On the other hand, what we developed is the exact muscle protein available in the animals using precision fermentation.
Yes.
Yeah, so that is the difference, actually.
I mean, how much of a potential game changer do you believe this is? I mean, I know this isn't an opportunity to kind of promote individual ingredients, but I mean, people are quite excited about this. Should they be?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we are quite excited about it, and we have been testing, we have been running a lot of consumer testing, and we call this technology Hemami. Maybe I need to mention, and we are launching this product by the end of the year. Cool. And and we have been doing a lot of consumer testing with our product, and we are getting really good reaction. Like we are looking 8 different focus groups, and in all those focus groups, we have been like a lot of people, like at least 3 to 4 people said that they will prefer this. Plant-based eaters, current plant-based eaters, they say they prefer this to a beef counterpart, which was great and fascinating news for us, especially the people who are working on the product at Motif Labs. And so, like, let's talk about that a little bit. So what it does, it brings you the whole experience, right? As you mentioned, James, from the time that you open the package, you take it out, you put it in the grill, you experience the whole cooking process, how the product reacts to all the reactions happening. And then finally, when you consume the product, you get the benefit of having that meaty flavor by using the hemami, which is a heme-binding protein currently available in the muscle.
So, I mean, I'm pretty excited about this because I'm a vegetarian, and provided that this, if you like, animal protein isn't produced by, you know, harming animals anyway, then I'm cool with it. But for maybe people that don't want to have quote unquote animal protein in a plant-based product, I mean, is it still, Adam or Matt, possible to create that authentic meaty taste without using you know, proteins that are found in animals, albeit, you know, produced by microbes?
Which one? Because you had Adam or Matt. We can either way. All right. No, I think you can. There's many ways. I mean, the chemistry, as you're going from we were talking about the Maillard reactions to Stecker degradations. You know, you have all the you know, intermuscular fats. All of that stuff plays in what, you know, what the cooking experience happens, and the moisture there, and the salts and the minerals. So you can give a close approximation of what it is. I think the key here is that, you know, one element is you're trying to match what the real, or not call it the real, but the animal-based version is, and then trying to get that same experience from a consumer standpoint and get them excited beyond just that first, hey, I'll try and then move on. What about those cooking cues, those key taste elements that makes that exciting? Because I think, you know, one thing is we're always trying to go back on these meat alternatives to benchmark it against meat, and in many cases there's going to always be a limitation. You won't get there as quickly as possible, simply because, you know, you're taking something that's fibrous, that has many factors that go into forming it, versus something that's globular and harvested in agricultural. So the key, or at least one of the things we're looking at, is saying from an experience standpoint, what is driving people to go into this? What excites them from a flavor standpoint? What savory notes or elements do you need to have to give an exciting experience? So it's really redefining the flavor or consumer consumption of this in a familiar format. And I think that's the key here, is if you're trying to hit exactly the same thing, it's like trying to, you know, produce gold from mining without mining gold. In some cases, it's just knowing that the reality is it's going to be very difficult. Why do we see the evolution of cellular agriculture as another pathway? And I saw that in an earlier session, as another pathway, with the promise that if you grow it similar, without having to harvest it directly from an animal, will it have the same flavor? Will it impart the same consumer experience? And how close can you get? So for me, I believe it really from the perspective is, can we evolve it to make it exciting, familiar, but it doesn't have to be exactly the alternative from animals. Okay,
Matt, briefly on that before we move on.
Yeah, and these younger consumers that are growing up with these, of course, they love the current products on the market that are doing such a great job of replicating the real meat experience. So yeah, I think that's why we're all very bullish on the growth of this category. Is you know, they're becoming such a dominant purchasing force within the industry. But, you know, technically, yeah, the when you think about water soluble versus oil soluble in a burger, and then you try to translate those attributes to a plant-based burger, you know, globular proteins versus, you know, myosin active, you know, linear proteins, and how those globular proteins have an affinity for flavor, so they kind of want to hold on to it. And so you really need to be strategic in your order of operations and hydrations and processing parameters in order to be able to maximize, you know, the taste and aroma components that are, you know, some are going to be more water soluble versus oil soluble, and you know, I think some of the better burgers on the market do a really good job of you know, using that chemistry to their advantage to create great tasting products.
Okay, so I want to talk about when to add flavors. I mean, how do processing techniques like, say, high moisture extrusion impact the flavor of proteins? And, you know, when do you add the flavors? Before, during, after extrusion, or maybe some of these other kind of techniques like shear cell or spinning and so on. But, you know, when do you add the flavor? Adam.
All right. Thank you. So I think what's different from the low moisture extruded products is that you're going to have to add the flavor in at an earlier stage, whether you do it as a precursor, understanding the basic chemistry of what's happening as you're pushing this product through. The options for post extrusion is lower, and mainly because you're trying to permeate either, and Matt touched on this, either something that's a water soluble or an oil soluble into something that's already a saturated or partially saturated system. So you're not getting that penetration, or if you are, you're only getting it on the surface. I look at it this way: if we look at trying to rehydrate beef jerky versus eating a steak, you're not going to have exactly the same experience, and it's not going to give you the same structure, texture, and flavor, because of just the nature of, you've already taken that intercellular moisture out of there, and then trying to put it back in there doesn't work. Same thing happens with the extruded product. If you're going for a high moisture, now you're not going to be able to infuse as much or as fast, especially if you're trying to make it on mass market. So the limitation there is you got to put that flavor earlier on as much as you can, or you're doing it on the surface, and that's in at least from our experience, is the better pathway. And if you can put the right ingredient combination up front or at certain points of the extrusion, that's where you're going to get the maximum effect and preserve the experience from the final product at the end.
So I promise we're going to get onto you shortly, James, because we're going to talk about fat in the next section. But I want to talk about the flavour of some different plant proteins. Which ones, maybe Dilek, present the greatest kind of flavour challenges? And are some of the up and coming kind of plant proteins, people talking about lupin, barley, canola, chickpeas, and then also these emerging kind of fermentation-based proteins, you know, which ones kind of taste the best?
I mean, all of them, I guess, still has its own challenges, right? That's what I will say. And but then you really understand and approach it holistically, right? And try to find out, first of all, to get the best performance out of them from the texture-wise, using the technologies that are currently available, but also from the flavor-wise. I mean, I know, Adam, Matt, you can answer that question as well. There are a lot of techniques to how we can mimic some of the flavors, how we can also modify some of the bitter and aftertaste with each of the ingredient. And every protein is different, right? You may need to reach out and have a variety of toolbox which will solve the challenge on each specific area of protein. And in addition to that, I guess it is very important to say that you know, the flavors should be really work with the rest of the system too, not just with the protein, because you have other components in the formula, including fat, including binding system, etc. So the flavor system should complement the whole formula.
I mean, when it comes to some of these emerging proteins, when I was talking, I don't know if she's listening to Anne Palermo at Aquacultured Foods, which is one of these startups that's producing whole cut seafood products, for example, via sort of growing fungi. I don't know what strain or variety it is. But she said one of the attractive things about the product is that it doesn't have any particular flavor. Again, I haven't tried the products from Nature's Find or Better Meat Co. or At Last or Meaty, but some of these kind of newer emerging fermentation-based products where you're harvesting the whole biomass, do they not have some of the flavor challenges of traditional plant proteins? Do they taste better, or of nothing? Have you tried any of those? Or anyone else want to come in on that? Adam or Matt?
It's an interesting question, and yeah, I mean, I think just one thing you do have to be aware of is just the taste of the media. You know, the media is designed to make those cells grow. It's not, and naturally, as it's a substrate, it's going to you know, impart flavor into the protein matrix, and you know, that needs to be considered. But yeah, I think if you ask us that question in a few years from now, I think we'll have a better answer for that. But it's such an exciting area of growth.
Yeah. So while I've got you on the line, so can you talk about any kind of new things that Givaudan is working on from a flavour perspective? I think I last talked to a colleague of yours a while back about kind of koji fermented minerals and novel blocking and masking systems, you know, eliminating off flavours in pulse proteins. But, you know, anything you'd like to share about what you're working on?
Yeah, similar to what Dilek just said. I mean, every protein has its own set of challenges, and so we take a deep dive approach on you know, where every year we look at a new protein. So last year we did a big deep dive on pea protein and looked at it in a lot of different applications and from a lot of different suppliers too. In growing areas, you get a lot of differences across all of those variables, and you know, pea protein it's still very young. You know, if you think about all the refinements that have happened to soy over the last couple decades, and you know, pea protein's still in its infancy, but it's you know, highly functional. You don't have the allergen baggage, and you know, we've and then just various ways of processing are going to bring out different tonalities of that pea protein, and so I think that's really important, is to you know, really understand that, take a deep dive, and then you know, work with the supplier to co-create around that, because you know, we've developed some masking and blocking solutions there that are helpful, and then you know, every year we pick a new protein. This year we're deep diving on chickpea.
Okay.
But yeah, and you know, also with fat, you know, and I know we're going to talk about fat next, but you know, we're looking a lot about how can you use fat to and encapsulate that with flavor and protect it from the protein matrix in a product to be able to you know, to make that really pop when the consumer eats it, and you know, it doesn't volatilize during the preparation process, for example.
Okay, so finally, James, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. So I want to talk about fats. You know, fats, as I understand it, are a great kind of repository for flavour. And they're often kind of distributed through animal flesh in a way that maybe is quite hard to replicate when you're producing, say, a plant-based product. But, you know, can you talk about why fat is so important, you know, if you want to come up with a convincing meat alternative?
Look, I think it's part of the solution. I think everyone around, you know, everyone that has been speaking, we're all coming at the problem from different angles, and I think all of those angles are critical. But in terms of the fat, you know, when you say fat, it's not a sexy word, but it's a really important one in terms of how we perceive our food, and it ranges not only from the sort of fat that people are generally familiar with, like a cooking fat or an oil. It's also the non-triglyceride fats, the free fatty acids, the phospholipids, the lactones in the case of dairy. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff that is encompassed in this lipid field, and they all have different attributes or provide different attributes to that food. And so from the starting point, you have something like a triglyceride fat or oil, and this will provide a really good mouthfeel when you eat it, and it'll provide a good heat transfer basis, and it'll, you know, give a really interesting texture to the food. And then you come to things like phospholipids, which as they break down and they get volatilized, they'll give really specific aromas during the cooking process, and they'll participate in the degradations and the Maillard reactions that were spoken of earlier. And it's really difficult to replicate some of these things via plants, because plants just typically don't have these sort of molecules in them. And so trying to emulate that, you're left with really two approaches. You can take a generic plant fat, and you can say, we're going to do something really clever with this, and I think what Motif is doing, introduce it to the food in a really intelligent way, so that it starts to emulate the mouthfeel and other attributes. Or you can do, I think what Givaudan is doing really well, which is capture those endpoint top notes and those other flavor attributes and introduce that directly. I think the approach that we're taking is, well, can we just build the real thing in the first place? I think there are still challenges associated with that, because you have to understand that the protein we're working with here is not the animal protein necessarily, it's now a plant protein. So the fat may need to be a little different before those two things work together.
So, I mean, currently, if you look at most burgers on the market, they'll have a hard fat like coconut or cocoa butter or something like that. And then they'll have liquid oils like canola or sunflower or whatever. I mean, are they doing, why, to start with, do they have those two different types of fats? And are they doing a good job?
I think depending on how they're done, they can be doing a pretty damn good job at the moment. So there's some really impressive technology around, and I think some of the others can speak to this around how you introduce those sort of plant oils into these new protein foods to make them really appetizing. But I think there is a gap, and an alarming number of the plant protein and recombinant protein food companies that we talk to say, you know, we really want something that's more animal-like, because there's a wide recognition that it's a real neglected part of the ingredient list up to the last couple of years.
So, I mean, we'll get the questions at the end, but I'm just seeing one literally on my screen right now from George, who says, you know, if you wanted to bring something more animal-like, is it best to do what, say, the guys at Mission Barnes are doing, whereby you're literally using, you know, animal cells and growing real animal fats, you know, in a fermentation facility? Or is it better to use, say, precision fermentation and produce kind of animal fats or animal-like fats using, you know, microbes? I mean, I don't know. I guess with all the biofuels companies, I know a few years ago writing about all these microalgae firms that were kind of pivoting from biofuels to food, and a lot of these organisms produce quite a lot of fat. But could you talk about the merits of those different approaches, you know, like real animal fat, if you like, from cells versus precision fermentation?
Look, I'm personally so excited about cellular agriculture. I think cultured food products are fascinating, and I think that, you know, whether they be fat or whether they be muscle, right? And I think they're going to have a great place in our food chain. But I think they do face some challenges right now, even aside from the cost issue, right? And so one of those is that if you go and put a cow or a pig out onto, you know, pasture, or you feed a grain, it's going to have different flavors in its meat, right? Based on what it's eating and how it's treated. And the same thing happens with the cultured cells. It's very much a case of what is in that media, in that growth media, to give it a particular flavor or a particular performance. But there's even a more fundamental angle, which is, I've had a lot of companies say to us, please don't just go and make cow fat, because that's not what our food needs. And so, you know, the approach that we try and take is to understand, well, what are the attributes that we could really win on? You know, what do we need to build from the ground up to make it exciting? But I think one thing we haven't touched on yet, and this is where it gets, you know, really interesting, is we've got, now that we can use synthetic biology and, you know, start to attack this problem, we've got this whole new solution space out there that we just haven't started to tap yet. You know, we eat cows and we eat you know, chickens because they were easily domesticated, not because they were the best tasting things. And now we have an opportunity to move into these new areas.
But can you just briefly explain to the audience what Nourish is actually doing? So you're kind of taking yeasts and you're engineering them to produce different kinds of fats. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, that's it. So we effectively brew fat. So we and other types of lipids. So, you know, my background is in lipid engineering, mostly in crops, but this time we're doing it in yeast. And what we've been able to do is to create triglycerides and other types of lipids that are animal-like in their nature, but we produce them in yeast.
And how efficient are these yeasts at producing fats? And are they producing kind of novel fats, or fats that are the same as fats that we already know are familiar with?
So I think we face a slightly different challenge to the protein folk in terms of fermentation. There are oleaginous yeasts or oil yeasts that are out there that naturally produce flipping great wadges of oil, right? And the challenge for us is not to so much ramp up the amount of oil, but to tune the type of oil that's being produced. So it is a bit of a different challenge. And I've forgotten the second part of the question.
Yeah, so it was whether the fats you're producing are novel fats or whether you're kind of replicating something that an animal does, but just with yeast.
So we're producing novel fats. So in the case of if you take something like a dairy fat, a butter, a milk fat or a butter fat, you look at it and you say, okay, this is mostly a fairly uninteresting fat. Okay, it could 80% of that could be plant-like in origin, but there's a 20% of it which is really interesting and really unusual. And so that's, as an example, that's the sort of part of the product that we double down on.
And how do you describe to consumers and regulators what it is that you're actually doing? Do you know how some of these fats might be listed on a food label, for example, and what the regulatory process would be, say, in the US market?
Look, I'll be perfectly honest, we've still got work to do on that, and it'll be work that's done in partnership with our customers. Yeah, I'm not sure how we will label it on the pack, but it is a GMO yeast. However, there's no GMO material, or there's no genetic material in the product because we're really highly refined. But I think the sort of myoglobin, the leg hemoglobin, these sort of protein products are examples that customers in many segments are willing to take on GMO products in any case.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm kind of getting from you is it's all about picking the right fat that will work in a given matrix with the right protein. So you're kind of, am I right in saying that you're not saying, lard-like fat maybe doesn't work brilliantly with pea protein or whatever? You need to match the protein and the fat, or, all of the ingredients.
I think if you do clever enough chemistry, like the stuff that the others around the table are doing, you can get away with a lot. But if you really want to make it sing, then you need to get closer to the animal-like thing in the first place. In terms of, why people are trying to move away from coconut and cocoa butter, I think one of the real elephants in the room is that there is a scalability problem around these fats, right? Coconut and cocoa butter are relatively minor fats on the global scale. And if we collectively want to see plant protein reach the peaks that we all want it to in terms of global agriculture, it is not going to be on the back of these fats. There's just not enough of them there to scale without there being massive problems. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it develops.
Yeah, very exciting. So Dilek, I want to bring you in now. I know that I've talked to your colleagues in the past about some of the exciting work that you're doing in terms of trying to replicate the marbling effects you get in regular animal products with fats. And I believe you've got this oleogel, probably pronounced that wrong, oleogel technology, whereby you're kind of trapping liquid oil in this kind of scaffold so that you can kind of co-extrude it with plant-based proteins. So you've got this kind of marbling effect. I hope I've accurately described that, but maybe you can tell us what that means.
Oh yeah, that was great, Elaine. Yeah, that is correct. As we talked about, I think it was a good segue from flavor and then going to the texture, how you create the other sensory attributes, including juiciness. And what are we seeing is that if you look at how the formulations are developed currently, it is a toolbox of ingredients, and you are adding fat and mixing with all the other ingredients, including texturized proteins or HHMAs or binding systems. What we believe is that you need to really, if you look at the whole muscle, the fat is interfaced within the muscle proteins. So the extrudable fat technology is really looking at how we can interface the fat to a high moisture meat analog. And that's why this is a technology, actually, we licensed it from University of Guelph, and oleogel is thermally reversible. So it is it starts as a solid, but when you heat it, it turns to a liquid. So you can interface it within any plant protein, and after the extrusion, it solidifies, creating that marbling impact. And we do believe that it will then really help to create the right juiciness, right sensory experience, and right texture in plant-based food products.
I mean, how different is that? So say if I added coconut fat to an extrusion process now, would that just screw everything up? Or
yes.
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Right, okay, so I'm kind of aware that time is moving on, so I want to talk about very briefly about flavour, because we haven't really got onto this in cell cultured meat. I know we've got some questions about cheese and so on, but I'm trying to focus it on meat alternatives, or we'll kind of go in lots of different directions. But Matt at Givaudan, I know that you've done some work, and I know that you've recently teamed up with Bühler and is it Migros in Zurich to kind of look at cell cultured meat. So can you talk about some of the challenges in cell cultured meat when it comes to flavor?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest challenges is making these things affordable and how do you create a flavor technology that can be used and is it's already challenging, and we think that hybrid products are going to need to be phase one. I think we're going to evolve over the next decade to phasing into scaling these products so that they meet the expectations of consumers, both on taste, texture, and price. But the same challenges that we've talked about earlier with a hybrid product with plant protein, even if you use cellular material, you're still going to need you still need to mask the plant protein, create the same flavor, the flavor sensations that consumers are expecting, and then blend that functionality of a plant protein with a cellular protein. It's not going to behave exactly like muscle, and so using processing techniques to get the most out of it, and integrate that within the matrix to create a taste that consumers expect. But yeah, it's still very early in this collaboration, and it's a fun challenge to have.
I mean, just to kind of clarify, because the promise of cell cultured meat, down the road has always been that this is not an approximation, it's real meat and it's presented to consumers as the real thing. Are you saying that you still have to add flavors to it, or is that because in these initial wave of products, they're maybe not going to be 100% real meat? They're going to be adding in plant proteins for cost or texture reasons, or, I mean, down the road, are we still going to have to add flavors to, real cell cultured meat?
Yeah, I mean, even with animal proteins today, when you look at delivering flavor, managing that through the shelf life, consumer preparation, you put flavor into marinated chicken breasts, for example, and that's a muscle that has been exercised to a degree, sure. and with not having a muscle that's not exercised in a traditional sense, you have a different set of physical chemical challenges in delivering that flavor. So yeah, we still think that flavors are going to be important. It's just going to be a different flavor challenge than a plant-based protein, when you're looking at a pure meat material.
Okay, James, I believe that you've recently teamed up with another Australian company called Vow, which was working on cell cultured meat. Can you tell us a bit more about that collaboration?
Yeah, it's a fascinating one, and they're sort of a sister company in a sense that they're sort of similar stage of development to us. It's fascinating to bring the two halves together, because I think what they're doing on the cellular ag front, or the cultured cell front, is it's really got something to bring to the sort of ingredients we are building, and I think they're taking an interesting approach as well. They're exploring more unusual types of meats and seeing if they can do something interesting with those. But we're fascinated to be working on both the recombinant and the plant protein. One that surprised me was the sort of interest that we got from traditional food companies as well, on traditional food lines. So it's really across the spectrum that people are looking for better solutions, whether it be how the starting point that which is what we're working on, or whether it's how you cleverly incorporate this stuff into the food product. I think they're both parts of the challenge.
Okay, so Matt or Dilek, I don't know if you want to talk at all about cell cultured meats, whether you've done any work in that space. Matt? Oh, sorry, not Matt. I'm just losing my marbles. Adam.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've also worked at in the space with several companies that are interested in some of the points that Matt had brought up is, what influences the flavor have in a growth medium? How do you, bring in the precursors that develop the right flavor tonality, whether you're targeting a chicken-like cell or whether you're trying to even do seafood or fish or crustaceans. So the complexity of the actual solve there is not only from the growth medium, but even when you think about how those cells grow and the density, it's all about bringing the density in there, but you're still not getting that fibricity, that structural alignment the same way. And then let's bring in James into this thing, and you're not getting that intramuscular fat that comes in there, as well as that intramuscular fat that adds from the growth medium the flavor attributes. So to answer the question from the earlier stage, the challenge is still there in terms of the flavoring. How do you deliver it? How do you let's say offer something that excites the consumer besides the one and done? And more importantly, I think where I see all of these pathways going in, and we see the typical agricultural, we go the cellular meat, but also the fungal type, it's really trying to solve a fundamental problem of how do you get nutritious or nutrition density in a more efficient way. And I think for all of those have the same pathways, but besides the delivery of the nutrition, you still want to get the consumers to be excited about it. So for us, at least from IFF standpoint, and we, as you know, we had the big merger earlier this year as well. We have a whole new platform on our Mark Corwell teams and the probiotics. There's that whole element of now as you consume it, what else is that combination doing to either your gut biome and things on those areas? So it's really kind of trying to expand beyond just the consumer experience, even though that's what we're talking about today, and then having the added benefit of what combination, what nutrients, and does a cell-based or animal-based protein offer better digestive or overall nutritional health versus a plant-based, and what's that balance in there?
Okay, so I feel like we're still barely scratching the surface of a lot of these areas, but I'm now like 46 minutes in, so I'm going to move to audience questions. Just while I'm kind of looking through those, I just got a quick question. I mean, which flavors, beef, pork, chicken, tuna, are kind of hardest to emulate? Maybe Matt at Givaudan, you can take that while I'm looking through.
Yeah, we have definitely bridged the gap on, I'd say whitefish, shrimp. These are very, very challenging flavors to deliver, vegetarian flavor solutions for. I think consumers do expect a little bit of an oxidized fat oil note in that, but they don't. But certainly it can go too far, and you got to be very careful with that. And just whitefish is so delicate. When you contrast that with a burger, which is kind of a flavor bomb. Getting those mid notes and top notes just right to get a cod or tilapia type of taste is a big challenge, and one that we've been working on for a while now, and we're getting closer every day. But that's kind of what we've observed at Givaudan.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions for Dilek about the myoglobin, about the process and the regulatory process. So you're going through the GRAS determination process. Could you just speak a little bit to that and the safety, process that you're doing to reassure people this is safe?
Correct. We just done our GRAS application for our myoglobin. So, and we are waiting to hear from FDA, and we'll be more than happy to speak to you, Elaine, about that when we got that approval. And in terms of the safety of the product, yes, you are right. We are using precision fermentation to produce the product, and we are basically right now, as we speak, in the commercialization phase of the product, and it will be launched end of the year. And obviously, during the commercialization phase, we are following every USDA food regulations and standards that are available, and the product will be available to sell before the end of this year.
But I guess at base, if it's basically the same protein that's found in muscle tissue that we've been eating for years anyway, your argument is that we've kind of got that history of safe consumption because it's effectively the same thing. Is that it?
Yeah, that's the base of the GRAS filing. That is correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a question here for James. I apologise in advance if you've already answered it in the chat. But it's asking if your plan is to engineer and train one specific strain, I guess, of yeast with multiple sequences that will produce a mixture of novel fats, or if you're going to have to produce or engineer a whole bunch of different strains for different fats.
Look, yeah, thanks. So the answer is a bit of both, in the sense that we are building multiple strains, but there is a strong ability to blend, right, in order to achieve what a specific customer wants in terms of either profile or functionality.
Okay, I'm just looking. Please type in your questions as we're talking. Okay, so one of the questions I was interested in was, we talked a little bit about seafood alternatives, but do they present kind of different sensory challenges to, say, a burger? I mean, I guess obviously they're different, but is it particularly challenging to produce seafood flavors? I don't know who wants to come in on that.
Yeah, and Adam here, and echoing some of the comments that Matt had made earlier about it's that delicate balance of how much of that marine-like notes, those amines, that oxidative notes that you get from the oils, versus it being too fishy. And what makes it even more challenging, even if you're going into the plant-based segment, is you're now trying to deal with say you're trying to do that with a pea protein, you're fighting the grain notes, the cardboard, what people are considering off more vegetative notes. So you got to block those olfactory notes, and then at the same time pull up the subtleties that you get from a good fish. So whether it's tuna, it's whether whitefish, it's really a combination of strategy. And I think there's a lot of evolution in that area, but there's a ways to go. So from a flavor standpoint, people don't want fishy fish.
Okay, Matt, one for you. Are you working with other kind of texturizing technologies? It seems like extrusion is the kind of main game in town at the moment for some of these proteins, but things like shear cell or spinning or other technologies that texturize proteins, how do they impact flavor development versus extrusion? I don't know if you've done any work on this.
We've been putting most of our resources into high moisture extrusion, and as we talked about earlier, that challenge of getting the a cost effective something cost effective coming out the end of the extruder, and then being able to top note that by various unit operations to create something that has that aroma that is characterizing. That's really been our focus.
Another question about flavor issues with plant proteins. Does more work need to be done through kind of smarter plant breeding techniques so that you eliminate some of these flavor components through the breeding process rather than kind of trying to mask them? I know, James, actually, you've done some work on sort of plant breeding as well as playing around with microbes.
Yeah, look, it wasn't quite plant breeding. We engineered a whole synthesis pathway into canola. But that was really interesting. But it shows what can be done with plant platforms as well. I think precision fermentation is fascinating because it's fast, right? And it's easy to get to market in that sense. Crop plants are still where it's at in terms of productivity. And so I think trying to strip out some of the undesirables from the plant protein base is really well worth doing. Yeah.
Okay, we've got one more question before I'm going to be told to stop, from Michael. Can you talk about the potential unlocks for elevating proteins to beyond current conventional animal meat? So I guess we're talking all the time about trying to perfectly replicate animal meat, but can we do a better job? It's interesting. I get sent, samples of things like plant-based chicken nuggets, and my husband, who is a meat eater, will say, these taste good or whatever, but I prefer the taste of them to regular chicken, rather than saying I want something that tastes exactly like this Tyson chicken nugget. I mean, can we do better than just trying to replicate animal meat flavors?
I'm going to jump in quickly. We've been eating the same things for thousands of years. If we can't do better in the next few thousand, there's something wrong with us. Let's shake it up a bit.
Okay, well, I think on that note, we've run out of time, so I'm going to wrap things up here and thank my fabulous panelists for sharing their insights, and thank you again to the GFI for inviting me. And I believe there's some information in the resources in the section below this panel if you want to check that out. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.